Hello, my name is Ethan Parker, 36 years old. I'm sitting here in the middle of a small bee farm in rural Vermont, listening to the hum of the beehives. The sweet scent of honey blends with the aroma of dry grass and earth, as if the whole world is breathing with me. The bees buzz back and forth, each with a purpose, a mission, and I see myself in them. A man who once lived for duty, for family, even though that family has broken my heart more times than I can count. My story didn't begin here amidst the beehives and lush green fields. It started long before in a small town near Burlington, where I grew up with big dreams and a heart heavy with obligations. I was born into a middle-class family. Our house sat at the end of a street called Maple Street, where in autumn the leaves turned red like fire blazing along the porch. Our home was a 2-story white-painted house with a wooden fence faded by time. My father, Robert Parker, was a bank employee with salt and pepper hair, always impeccably dressed, but with eyes that were perpetually cold, as if he was calculating everything in his mind. He was tall, thin, with a hooked nose that made him look sterner than necessary. My mother, Susan, was the opposite. She loved vibrant floral dresses, her hair curled in golden waves, but her personality was sharp and critical. She worked part-time at a hair salon, but most of her time was spent shopping or socializing with friends. They weren't poor, but the way they spent money always made me uneasy. I had a younger brother, Lucas Parker, 4 years my junior. Lucas was a smart, shy kid with big, round eyes that always looked at me as if I were his hero. We grew up in a house filled with laughter, but also no shortage of arguments. My parents weren't the type to save money. They took out loans to buy new cars when the old ones still ran fine, threw lavish parties to show off to the neighbors, and never thought about saving for the future. Lucas and I, though young, quickly learned to live differently. We shared responsibilities. I mowed the lawn and washed dishes while Lucas cleaned the house and did laundry. We didn't want to burden our parents further, though sometimes I wondered, did they truly care about us? When I was 19, I faced a major crossroads. I didn't want to stay in that town where everything seemed predestined. I wanted to do something big, meaningful, and above all, I wanted to help my family find stability. So I decided to join the U.S. Army. The day I signed the enlistment papers, my parents merely nodded as if it were a given. Lucas was the only one who hugged me tightly, whispering, "You have to be careful, Ethan." I smiled, ruffled his hair, and promised I'd be back soon. The Army was no rosy dream. The grueling training days at boot camp left me exhausted, but they also forged me into a disciplined, resilient man. I learned how to stay calm under pressure, how to work as a team, and how to put my goals above fear. My comrades, young men from all corners of the country, became my second family. We shared stories about our hometowns, our dreams, and our fears. I told them about Lucas, about his dream of going to college, and I took pride in saying I'd help him achieve it. Every month I sent most of my paycheck back to my parents. I saw it as my duty to keep the family stable, to pay the bills, and to ensure Lucas had a chance at education. My parents never said thank you, but I told myself they needed me. They wrote letters, called, and told me about troubles at home, rising electricity bills, a broken car, or mom needing a new dress for a party. I never refused. I sent money, sometimes my entire modest paycheck, keeping only enough for bare essentials. Lucas, in his scribbled, handwritten letters, always thanked me. He said that because of me, he could focus on studying and dream of a better future. Those letters were what kept me going. But then things began to change. After retiring early, my parents became even more dependent on me. They stopped working, yet their spending grew more reckless. They bought a big screen TV, took trips to Las Vegas, and even borrowed money to renovate the house. I started getting calls demanding more, not to cover bills, but to help Mom and Dad live more comfortably. I tried to explain that my soldiers' pay wasn't enough, but my mother just laughed over the phone, saying, "You're the eldest son, Ethan. You have to take care of the family." Those words cut into my self-respect like a knife, but I still sent the money. I remember one time when I was on leave and came home, I discovered that my parents had used the money I sent to buy a new car. They drove it around town, showing off to everyone, while Lucas had to work part-time at a fast food restaurant to pay for his textbooks. I was furious for the first time in my life. "That money was for the family, not for a car," I said, my voice trembling with anger. My father just shrugged and my mother turned away, muttering something about me being disrespectful. Lucas pulled me outside, apologizing on their behalf, but I saw the shame in his eyes. I hugged him, told him everything would be okay, but inside a crack had formed in my heart. The years in the Army passed quickly. I was promoted and trusted with more important tasks, but the pressure grew heavier. I began to feel exhaustion, not just physical, but mental. Every time I received a letter from home, I felt both hope and fear. Hope that my parents would change, that they'd appreciate what I was doing. But fear always won. The fear that they only saw me as a money machine. Still, I pressed on for Lucas for the promise I made to myself that I wouldn't let our family fall apart. I didn't know then that those years were merely the prelude to a bigger storm. My life, already scarred with invisible wounds, was about to be torn apart by an event I could never have foreseen. That year I was 28, at the peak of my military career. I was assigned a mission in the Middle East, a dusty, dangerous region where gunfire and smoke were the only things you could rely on. Our task was to escort a supply convoy through a remote road, a route often ambushed by insurgent groups. I had done missions like this dozens of times, and each time I told myself to be careful that I would survive to return to Lucas, to my family. But this time everything was different. We moved out on a sweltering afternoon, the sun scorching everything under its blazing red light. I was in the lead Humvee, checking the map, communicating with my team over the radio. My comrade, Jake Miller, a guy from Texas, with a smile always plastered on his face, was telling a story about his new girlfriend. I laughed, trying to keep the mood light. But deep inside, I had a nagging sense of unease. The road was too quiet, not a soul in sight, only the sound of the wind whistling through the sand dunes. Then it happened. A deafening explosion tore through the air. I only had time to hear Jake scream before the Humvee flipped over. Everything descended into chaos. Smoke fire, the relentless crack of gunfire. I felt a searing pain in my right leg, as if someone was ripping my body apart. I crawled out of the wreckage, dragging Jake with me, but he was motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. I shouted his name, shook his shoulders, but there was no response. Blood from my legs soaked the sand, and I began to lose consciousness. The last thing I remember was the sound of a rescue helicopter and a distant voice calling my name. "Parker, hold on. Don't give up." I woke up in a military hospital, the blinding white lights forcing me to squint. A doctor stood beside me, his voice calm and steady, informing me that I had lost my right leg below the knee. A piece of shrapnel from the explosion had shredded bone and muscle, and they couldn't save it. I would be fitted with a prosthetic leg, sent back home, and discharged due to my condition. I listened, but didn't fully process, as if he were talking about someone else. Me, Ethan Parker, the man who could run 5 miles without stopping, who carried 55,000 gear through the desert, was now The days in the hospital blurred together. I was given painkillers, cared for diligently by nurses, but in my mind the images of the explosion played on repeat. The blast, Jake's face, the helplessness of not being able to save him. I started having nightmares not just at night, but even when I was awake. A loud noise like a door slamming or a truck passing by was enough to make me jump, my heart-pounding sweat pouring as if I'd been doused in water. The doctors called it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They prescribed medication, suggested I see a therapist, but I refused. I thought I could push through the way I had always pushed through everything. At 29, I was discharged and returned to Vermont. I didn't know what I expected when I came home. Maybe a hug from Mom, a word of encouragement from Dad, or, at the very least, a place where I could heal. I returned to the house on Maple Street with a backpack, a clumsy prosthetic leg, and a heavy heart. Lucas was the one who picked me up at the airport. He was taller now, no longer the scrawny kid from before. When he saw me on crutches, his eyes welled up, but he forced a smile and hugged me tightly. "You're back, Ethan. Everything's going to be okay," he said. I nodded, but inside I wasn't sure. At first, my parents showed sympathy. Mom hugged me sobbing, saying how worried she'd been when she heard I was injured. Dad patted my shoulder, called me a hero, but his eyes were as cold as ever. They set up a small room for me on the ground floor since I couldn't climb stairs easily. Those first days, I felt loved, cared for. Mom made soup. Dad told stories about the town, and I thought maybe this was a chance for us to mend. But reality is always crueler than hope. Within a few months, I noticed my parents' attitudes shift. They stopped asking about my health, stopped caring about the nightmares that kept me up at night. Instead, they started complaining. "Ethan, you can't just lie there all day." Mom said even though I tried doing small chores around the house, washing dishes, folding laundry, even mopping the floor with a prosthetic leg I was still getting used to. "You used to be the breadwinner. And now what? You don't earn anything anymore," Dad said bluntly during one dinner. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I was still giving them my entire military pension, though it wasn't much, but to them it was never enough. I tried not to dwell on it, tried to find work to prove I wasn't useless. I got a job as a security guard at a nearby supermarket, but the panic attacks from PTSD made it impossible to stay. Once the sound of fireworks from a nearby festival sent me collapsing in the middle of the store, my heart racing, sweat streaming down my face. I was fired the following week. When I told Dad about it, he just smirked. "You were a soldier, and now you're scared of fireworks." How pathetic. Things came to a head one Christmas Eve when the family gathered around the dinner table. I had tried to make the evening festive. I bought gifts for my parents, scraping together every penny from my pension. But when I handed them over a knitted scarf for Mom and a cheap watch for Dad, Mom looked at me with disdain. "You think these things make up for anything? You're not the Ethan we were once proud of," she said, her voice icy. Dad chimed in. "If you can't contribute to this family, you'd better leave. We don't need a useless burden here." I sat there stunned, feeling like the world was crumbling. Lucas tried to defend me, but Mom cut him off. "Lucas, stay out of this. Your brother's no hero anymore." I looked into Lucas' eyes, saw him trembling with anger and helplessness, but I shook my head, signaling him to stay quiet. I didn't want things to get worse. That night I packed my things, just a backpack, a few clothes, and a photo of me and Lucas from when we were kids. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I quietly left the house I had sacrificed my youth to keep together. As I stepped outside, the air was freezing snow falling lightly, but I felt nothing but an emptiness in my chest. I had lost not only a part of my body, but also my family, or at least what I had thought was my family. I didn't know where I would go, only that I couldn't stay. One thought stood out in my mind. Grandpa William. He lived alone on a small bee farm in rural Vermont, a few hours' drive away. I was never close to him, as my parents always kept their distance. But I remembered the rare times I saw him, a kind man with a warm smile and calloused hands from hard work. I texted Lucas telling him I'd be okay and boarded a bus headed toward Grandpa Williams. As the bus rolled forward, I looked out the window watching the twinkling Christmas lights fade into the distance. I didn't cry, but my heart felt shattered. I had given everything, my youth, my health, a part of my body, to keep my family together, but in the end, I was just a burden. Yet, in that darkness, I didn't know that a small glimmer of light awaited me. A bee farm, a grandfather, and a new journey to rediscover myself. The bus rumbled along the bumpy country road, carrying me to a remote part of rural Vermont. I didn't bring much, just a backpack with a few clothes and shattered fragments of memories. My prosthetic leg scraped against the seat, creaking with every sway of the bus, a constant reminder that I was no longer the Ethan Parker of before. I had called Grandpa William before boarding, my voice hesitant, saying only that I needed a place to stay. He didn't ask much, just replied, "Come on over, Ethan. My door is always open." His warm, steady voice held no judgment, and that sparked a faint glimmer of hope in me. When the bus stopped at a tiny station in the middle of nowhere, I saw Grandpa William standing there leaning against an old pickup truck, his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was thinner than I remembered, his hair now completely white, his face etched with wrinkles like a map of a hard-lived life. But when he saw me, his smile lit up like the sun in the dead of winter. "Ethan, you've grown so much," he said, stepping forward to hug me. I returned the embrace awkwardly, trying to balance on my prosthetic leg. He didn't mention it, didn't show pity, just patted my shoulder and said, "Get in the truck. Let's go home." Grandpa William's bee farm was a few miles away, nestled among lush green fields and towering pines. His wooden house was small but cozy, with a porch lined with wooden chairs and pots of wildflowers. Surrounding it were dozens of neatly arranged beehives, the bees buzzing tirelessly, creating a strange natural symphony. I had never imagined living in a place like this, far from the hustle of life, far from the memories of war and my family's betrayal. But as I stepped off the truck, smelling the sweet honey and hearing the hum of the bees, I felt an odd sense of peace, as if my heart was allowed to rest, even if just for a moment. The first days at the farm weren't easy. Nightmares still haunted me. Some nights I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced I was back in the desert, surrounded by smoke and gunfire. Grandpa William often heard me shouting in the night. He never knocked on my door or cried, but quietly left a mug of hot tea outside my room the next morning. Once I asked him why he never said anything about my nightmares. He looked at me, his eyes full of understanding, and said, "Ethan, everyone has their own battles. I can't fight yours for you, but I can be here with you." Those simple, sincere words choked me up. Grandpa William was a man of few words, but each one carried weight. He told me about the bee farm, how he started beekeeping when he was young after losing Grandma. "Bees are remarkable creatures," he said, his eyes lighting up as he showed me the hives. "They work together. No one's selfish. No one abandons their own. If you listen, their hum will teach you how to live." I didn't fully grasp his meaning, but I began helping him, checking hives, replacing wooden frames, and learning how to handle sick bees. The work was slow, requiring patience, but strangely it calmed me. The steady rhythmic buzz of the bees was like a meditation, helping me forget my painful memories. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping coffee and watching the sunset, Grandpa William suddenly spoke about my father, Robert. "My son wasn't always like that," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "But when he married your mother, Susan, everything changed. They lived for themselves, took my savings to spend recklessly. I forgave them, but I never forgot." I was stunned. I had never known that my parents had deceived Grandpa William, taking what he had spent a lifetime saving. But he wasn't angry or bitter. He just smiled, petting the old cat on his lap, and said, "Life's too short to hold grudges, Ethan. You have to learn to let go." His words made me think. I had carried anger and pain since leaving home. Every time I thought of my parents, it felt like my chest was being crushed. But here, with Grandpa William, I began to feel something different. Not forgiveness, but freedom. Freedom from expectations, from the burdens I had carried for too long. The work at the bee farm gradually became a balm for my soul. I learned how to care for the bees, how to tell when a hive was healthy or when it needed help. Grandpa William taught me how to harvest honey carefully, removing frames from the hives without startling the bees. The first time I held a frame brimming with honey, its golden glow shimmering in the sunlight, I felt a small but genuine joy. "You did well," Grandpa William said, and I realized it was the first time in years someone had praised me without attaching conditions. But it wasn't always smooth. Some days my PTSD returned fierce and unforgiving. Once, while working in the fields, the sound of a plane's engine overhead sent me into a panic. I dropped a hive frame, collapsed to the ground, clutching my head and gasping for air. Grandpa William ran over, said nothing, just sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder until I calmed down. "I'm okay," I muttered, ashamed of my weakness. But he just shook his head. "No one expects you to be strong all the time, Ethan. Just keep trying. That's enough." Slowly, I found a passion in beekeeping. I started reading books about bees, learning how they communicate, protect their hive, and survive harsh winters. I realized that, like the bees, I was trying to survive not just the war, but the wounds in my heart. Each day I felt a little stronger, even though my prosthetic leg ached when the weather turned cold and nightmares still occasionally pulled me back to the desert. Grandpa William didn't just teach me about bees, he taught me how to live. He lived simply, demanding little but always found joy in small things. A fresh jar of honey an evening, listening to old records, or a rain that made the fields greener. I began to follow his example, finding joy in simple things like sitting on the porch, listening to the bees, and feeling the cool breeze on my face. One evening, as we ate dinner, just sandwiches and mashed potatoes, Grandpa William suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about the future, Ethan?" I hesitated. The future, to me, was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had lost too much, friends, health, family, to think about what lay ahead. But he looked at me, his eyes shining, and said, "This farm is small, but it has potential. If you want, we could make it bigger together." For the first time, I felt I had a new purpose, a reason to wake up each morning. I started dreaming of expanding the farm, not just to make money, but to build something of my own. I told Grandpa William about using technology sensors to monitor hive health automated equipment for harvesting honey. He laughed, nodded, and said, "Go for it, Ethan. I believe in you." Those words were like a small flame lighting up a dark corner of my heart. In the months that followed, I dove into research. I read about modern beekeeping technology, watched online videos, and even contacted a few experts in Vermont. I began experimenting, installing simple sensors to measure temperature and humidity in the hives. The first time a sensor alerted us to a struggling hive, Grandpa William and I saved the colony before it fell ill. He patted my shoulder, laughing heartily. "You're a true soldier, always finding a way to win." But technological improvements were only part of the journey. I realized that if we wanted the farm to grow, we needed to bring our products to market. Grandpa William's honey was exceptional, sweet, rich, with the distinctive flavor of Vermont's wildflowers, but he only sold to a few locals, mostly bartering for vegetables or bread. I wanted more. I wanted Parker honey to become a name people recognized not just in Vermont, but beyond. I started with social media, a world completely foreign to me, a 30-year-old veteran. I created Instagram and YouTube accounts for the farm, naming them Parker Honey Farm. At first I was clumsy, unsure how to shoot or edit videos. I remember the first time I held my phone to film Grandpa William harvesting honey. My hands shook so much the footage was a blurry mess. But I didn't give up. I learned to use simple editing software, wrote short posts about the beekeeping process, and shared my story. A veteran finding new meaning among the bees. I didn't delve into the details of my PTSD or my family's betrayal, but I spoke about my journey of healing, how the hum of the bees helped me find peace. The early posts and videos got only a handful of views, mostly from neighbors and Grandpa William's friends. But then a short video of Grandpa William and me checking hives at sunset went viral. Someone shared it in an organic products group, and overnight, it racked up hundreds of views. I started getting messages from strangers asking to buy our honey, or inquiring about how we cared for the bees. One person even wrote, Your story inspires me. Thank you for sharing. I read that message on the porch, and for the first time in years, I felt truly valued. Grandpa William and I began packaging honey in small glass jars, labeling them Parker Honey with a simple logo I designed a bee against a green field. We sold through Instagram at local farmers markets and even received orders from neighboring states. Money started coming in. Not a lot, but enough to buy more equipment and expand the number of hives. Grandpa William, though well into his 70s, worked tirelessly, and I could see he was happier than ever. "You've made my dream come true," he said one day as we tallied the month's revenue. I shook my head and replied, "No, Grandpa William, I'm just carrying your dream forward." Within a year, our bee farm grew beyond anything I had imagined. We hired 2 employees, a young woman named Olivia Bennett, passionate about organic farming, and a guy named Ryan Harris, who had worked at a nearby farm. They brought fresh energy, and I started to feel that the farm wasn't just Grandpa William's and mine. It was a small community. We built a brand. Parker Honey became a favorite at organic food stores, and we began shipping to New York, Massachusetts, and even a few small orders to Canada. But the growth wasn't just about money or scale. For me, it was a journey of reclaiming my confidence, my sense of self. The PTSD panic attacks still came, but they grew less frequent. Some days, a loud noise would startle me, or I'd wake up in a cold sweat, but the work at the farm kept me grounded. Standing in the bee fields, listening to their steady hum, I felt I was fighting not with guns or bullets, but with the wounds in my heart. Grandpa William was my teacher, my friend, my true family. He never pushed me to be strong, but his presence made me want to become the best version of myself. One day, while filming a video about checking hives, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas. He had graduated college, was working in Boston, and wanted to visit. "Ethan, I saw your farm on YouTube. I'm proud of you," he wrote. I smiled, my heart warming. Lucas was the only family member I still kept in touch with, though sparingly. I texted back, inviting him to come, feeling a spark of hope that we could reconnect. A few weeks after Lucas' message, I stood on the porch, looking down the dirt road leading to the farm, my heart racing like a kid waiting for a Christmas gift. Lucas had promised to visit that weekend, and today was the day. I wasn't sure what to expect, a hug, an awkward conversation, or just the comfortable silence of 2 brothers too long apart. But deep down I longed to rebuild the bond with him, the only family member who ever truly understood me. When Lucas' rental car rolled into the yard, kicking up dust under the sunset, I saw him step out taller than I remembered, wearing a light blue shirt and the same bright smile from our childhood. "Ethan," he called, running over to hug me tightly. I hugged him back, feeling the strength in his embrace. And in that moment, all the distance, all the years apart seemed to melt away. "Welcome home, kid," I whispered, my voice catching. Lucas laughed playfully, punching my shoulder. "Home. You've turned this farm into a bee empire." Grandpa William stood at the door, smiling warmly, his eyes twinkling as he watched us. "Come on in, Lucas," he said, his voice kind. "I've got some honey-glazed ribs that'll knock your socks off. You boys better eat up." We stepped into the small wooden house where the smell of roasted meat and mashed potatoes mingled with the scent of pine from the fireplace. The table was set simply but warmly, with a jar of Parker honey at the center, like a symbol of what we had built. Dinner began with laughter and stories. Lucas talked about life in Boston, his job at a tech company, and how he'd read my Instagram posts. "I'm not kidding, Ethan. I've been bragging to my coworkers about my honey mogul brother," he said, making me laugh. Grandpa William chimed in, recounting the time I dropped a hive frame when I was learning to harvest, and the 3 of us laughed until tears streamed down our faces. For the first time in years, I felt I truly belonged somewhere with these people, not out of duty, but out of love. Midway through dinner, Lucas grew quiet, looking at me with a serious expression. "Ethan, I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "Back then, at home, I didn't stand up for you. I knew Mom and Dad treated you terribly, but I was too scared to do anything. I shook my head, placing a hand on his shoulder. Lucas, you were young and you did everything you could. I don't blame you. He nodded, his eyes red, and I knew the wound between us was starting to heal. Grandpa William, as usual, didn't say much, but his eyes shone with pride as he looked at us. He raised a glass of homemade cider and said, "A toast." To cracks that are mending and to misunderstandings that are fading, we clinked glasses, and in that moment I felt a peace I had never known. Dinner ended with stories about bees, the farm's future, and dreams we wanted to pursue together. When Lucas left the next morning, he hugged me again, promising to return soon. "Ethan, I want to be part of this farm," he said. "Not just as a visitor, but as family." I nodded, my heart full. As his car disappeared down the road, I stood beside Grandpa William, watching, and knew this was the start of a new chapter, not just for the farm, but for us. The days that followed filled me with a new surge of energy coursing through my veins. Lucas had ignited a spark of hope in me, a belief that family isn't just about blood ties, but about those who choose to stand by you. As Grandpa William had once said, our bee farm, now proudly bearing the name Parker Honey, was thriving. Jars of honey lined the shelves of organic food stores across Vermont, and we were receiving orders from places so far away that I had to hire an extra worker to handle packaging and shipping. I began to dream bigger, not just about expanding the farm, but about turning it into a symbol of resilience, of people who rise after falling. But life, as I had learned from war, never lets you stay comfortable for long. One afternoon, as I was checking the hive sensors under the golden sunlight, a silver car pulled up to the farm's gate. I thought it was a customer, but when the door opened, my chest tightened. It was my parents, Robert and Susan Parker, dressed impeccably as if heading to a party. My mother, in a vibrant floral dress, stepped out with a forced smile. My father, in an old suit with his salt and pepper hair disheveled, scanned the farm as if appraising its worth. Grandpa William, sitting on the porch, stood up, his eyes as cold and sharp as steel. "Ethan, my son," my mother said, her voice sweet but artificial, like she was playing a role in a drama I had no interest in watching. "We need to talk." I stood there, clutching a hive frame, feeling the past rise up, threatening to swallow everything I had built. Grandpa William stepped beside me, saying nothing, but his presence was like a solid wall, reminding me I wasn't alone. "Robert, Susan." Grandpa William said, his voice low and firm. "What are you doing here?" My mother faltered, glancing at my father for support. My father cleared his throat, stepping forward with a forced friendly smile. "We know we were wrong. We want to apologize. We want to reunite as a real family." Those words sounded sweet, but I saw my father's eyes darting as if calculating something. My mother chimed in. "Ethan, we saw your farm online. You've done so well. We just want to be a part of it." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe them, to believe they were truly sorry that they had changed. But the memory of that Christmas Eve, when they called me useless and kicked me out, still burned in my mind. I looked at Grandpa William, and he gave a slight shake of his head as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. "Robert, Susan," Grandpa William said, his voice even but icy. "You took my savings, squandered them, and now you show up when Ethan is successful. Did you think I wouldn't see through your scheme?" My mother's face paled and my father stiffened. "That was a long time ago," my father said, his voice trembling slightly. "We were wrong, but we want to make it right." Anger surged in my chest, but I held it back, taking a deep breath. "Dad, Mom," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "I spent my youth taking care of this family, sending money home, sacrificing everything. But you only saw me as a money machine. When I needed you most, you turned your backs. I don't need your belated apologies." My mother started crying, but I wasn't sure if her tears were real or just another act. "Ethan, you can't treat your parents like this," she said, her voice choking. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of release as I spoke the words I'd held in for too long. Family isn't the people who push me out when I need them most. My family now is Grandpa William and the people who stayed by my side. My father's temper flared and he stepped closer, pointing at me. "Who do you think you are, Ethan? Some farm owner. You're still just a crippled soldier who lived off us for years." His words were like a blade, but they no longer cut me. I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm Ethan Parker, the man who built this farm from nothing alongside Grandpa William, and I don't need you to prove my worth." Grandpa William placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "Robert, Susan, leave," he said. "Don't come back." My mother tried to say something more, but my father pulled her back to the car, muttering about it not being worth the time. As their car disappeared, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer angry. I just felt relieved, as if I had finally cut the ties binding me to the past. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Lucas called, his voice brimming with excitement. "Ethan, I've got a week off. I want to come back to the farm, and I've got ideas for the business." When he arrived carrying a suitcase full of documents and a radiant smile, I knew he wasn't just visiting. Lucas had researched bee-related products, beeswax, cosmetics, scented candles, even beekeeping experience tours for tourists. "Ethan, we can make Parker honey more than just honey. It can be an experience," he said, his eyes sparkling. Grandpa William and I listened as Lucas laid out his plans, and I couldn't help but feel proud. The kid who once relied on me to buy textbooks was now a passionate young man. We started working together, experimenting with new products. Lucas designed a line of beeswax, cosmetics, moisturizers, lip balms, and we began selling them online. The beekeeping experience tours attracted visitors from far and wide, from families curious about bees to journalists wanting to write about our story. Lucas stayed at the farm longer than planned, and we became a triome, Lucas and Grandpa William. Every evening, we sat on the porch, eating simple meals filled with laughter. Lucas apologized again for the past, but I just shook my head. "You're here now, and that's enough," I said. And from the bottom of my heart, I knew I had forgiven him. Meanwhile, my parents kept reaching out, sending messages, calling, even mailing a long, rambling letter claiming they regretted everything and wanted to reconnect. But Grandpa William and I were in agreement. We didn't need them anymore. One day, as Lucas and I were packing a large honey shipment for a client in New York, he looked at me and said, "Ethan, I've always admired you. Even when things were at their worst, you never gave up." I smiled, feeling a peace I had never known. "Lucas, I couldn't have done it without you and Grandpa William," I replied. The bee farm was no longer just a business. It was a home, a place where I and the people I loved built something together. I still faced PTSD, but the nightmares were fewer. And when they came, I knew I had Grandpa William and Lucas to lean on. I learned that sometimes family is the people you choose, the ones who stand by you when the world turns its back. As I stood in the bee fields watching the bees dance, I knew my journey wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Parker, honey, Grandpa William, and myself, Ethan Parker, a man who found light in the darkness and would keep fighting not out of duty, but out of love. The years that followed at the bee farm were a string of meaningful days, like drops of sweet honey flowing from a hive frame. Parker Honey was no longer just a business. It had become part of the community. We expanded our operations, producing not only honey but also beeswax products, scented candles, moisturizers, lip balms, and the beekeeping experience tours Lucas had suggested. Small buses brought tourists from Burlington, Boston, and even farther, stopping at the farm to hear our story, to learn how bees live and work as a family. I often stood before crowds, sharing my journey not as a soldier or a wounded veteran, but as a man who found purpose among the bees. I was no longer the Ethan Parker of before, the soldier burdened by family the son betrayed, or the man tormented by PTSD. I still had nightmares. Nights when I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if I were back in the smoky desert. But they came less often, and when they did, I was no longer afraid. I would step outside, stand among the bee fields, listen to their steady hum, and feel my heart settle. Grandpa William once said that bees teach us how to live working together, never selfish, never abandoning their own. I learned that not just from the bees, but from Grandpa William, from Lucas, and from myself. Lucas became an indispensable part of the farm. He moved permanently from Boston to Vermont, bringing his energy and creative ideas. Together, we built a website for Parker Honey where customers could order online and read about our story. Lucas also suggested opening a small stall at the farm where tourists could buy products and enjoy honey-infused coffee on the spot. "Ethan, we're not just selling honey, we're selling inspiration," he said. And I couldn't agree more. Every jar of honey, every candle, every tour was part of our journey. A journey of overcoming pain, rediscovering passion, and building a true family. Grandpa William, though well over 75, worked tirelessly. He loved sitting on the porch watching Lucas and me bustle about, sometimes teasing that we were making a racket and disturbing his bees. But I saw his eyes light up whenever customers praised our honey or a local newspaper wrote about Parker Honey. One day he pulled me aside and handed me an old wooden box. Inside was a notebook filled with his handwritten beekeeping tips from his youth, along with scribbled dreams of expanding the farm. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you and Lucas made it happen, Ethan." I hugged him, my heart warm knowing this was the greatest gift I could give him, turning his dream into reality. But not everything was perfect. My parents Robert and Susan didn't give up. They kept sending messages, calling, and even appeared in a local newspaper claiming to be the inspiration behind my success. I read the article, saw them talk about how they always supported me and were proud of their son, and I gave a wry smile. Lucas, when he saw it, was furious and wanted to confront them, but I stopped him. "They're not worth our time, Lucas," I said. "They're not our family anymore." Grandpa William, sitting nearby, nodded. "Let them live with the choices they made, Ethan. You have us, and that's enough." Grandpa William and I decided to cut off all contact with them. I blocked their numbers, deleted unread messages, and focused on the present. I no longer felt anger or pain when I thought of them. I had learned from Grandpa William that resentment only weighs down the heart, and I didn't want to carry that burden anymore. My family was Grandpa William, Lucas, Olivia, and Ryanthe. People who worked with us at the farm and the customers who sent thank you notes for a jar of honey or my story. Family is those who choose to stand by you, not those who show up only when you succeed. One autumn afternoon, as the bee fields glowed under golden sunlight and the scent of wildflowers, I stood in the farm looking at the neatly aligned hives and the bees buzzing tirelessly. Lucas was guiding a group of tourists, showing them how to check a hive without startling the bees. Grandpa William sat on the porch reading an old book, his elderly cat curled up beside him. I smiled, feeling a peace I had never known before. I thought about my journey from a young man full of ideals joining the army to a wounded soldier, a son abandoned by his family, and now a man who found meaning in the simplest things. I had lost so much, a part of my body friends like Jake Miller, and a family I had sacrificed everything to hold together. But I had gained so much more. A passion, a home, and a true family. Parker Honey had become a symbol in the local community. We were invited to speak at agricultural fairs, contacted by schools to organize beekeeping workshops for students. Once a little girl from a tour group ran up and hugged me saying, "I want to grow up strong like you." I laughed, patted her head, and said, "You will as long as you don't give up." Those words, I realized, were what I wanted to tell my younger self. One evening, as Lucas, Grandpa William, and I sat down to dinner, Grandpa William's familiar honey-glazed ribs, I spoke up unexpectedly. "Grandpa Lucas, thank you both. Without you, I don't know where I'd be." Lucas grinned playfully, punching my shoulder. "Ethan, I'm the one who should be thanking you. You showed me what a real family is." Grandpa William just smiled, raised his glass of homemade cider, and said, "To Parker, honey, and to us." As I stood to clear the table, I looked out the window, seeing the moonlight bathe the bee fields, making them shimmer like stars on the ground. I thought about my journey, my scars, both visible and invisible, and how I had overcome them. I was no longer the soldier carrying burdens, no longer the son seeking approval. I was Ethan Parker, a man who found light in the darkness. And I knew that no matter what the future held, I would keep moving forward with love, with passion, and with my true family. My story ends here in the bee fields, where their hum reminds me that life, however hard, is always worth fighting for. And if you ever feel lost, remember that family isn't about blood. It's about those who choose to stand by you. And sometimes, the light you seek is right in front of you. If only you dare to step forward.